right, I need a drink for this one. Today's big topic is money in politics. We're going to talk about why it's important, how we got there, and what the hell we can do about it. So what's the problem with money in politics? In brief, it disrupts our fundamental relationship with our elected officials. In politics, there is a two-person job. The first job is for the elected official to keep our best interest in mind. The second job is for we the people to pay attention. Pretty simple stuff. But because of competition, candidates are more than willing to play favorites to corporations, unions, and the ultra-wealthy, securing their best interest. This competition of raising the most money causes a pool of potentially good candidates to dwindle down to the ones willing to do favors. Also, there's time consumption. Candidates and elected officials spend far more time fundraising and not enough time learning the issues that matter most. A report back in April 2016 said, newly elected members of the House were told they should spend 30 hours a week in the Republican and Democrat call centers across the street dialing for dollars. Now, once you feel like members of Congress don't have your best interest in mind, eventually they will lose your interest. Then we become a community of people who believe we cannot make a difference. Or to look at it another way, almost 100 million voters didn't vote in 2016. That brings us to our job, paying attention. Here's a small example. In 2016, in Massachusetts, there was an election that took place between Elizabeth Warren and Jeff Deal for Senate. Warren got 60% of the vote. Deal, 30% of the vote. Now, I'm well aware of Massachusetts is a blue state for the most part, but there was an independent candidate by the name of Shiva Ayyadurai. He got 3% of the vote. This gentleman moved to this country from India as a child, went from poor to middle class to finally building his own wealth. He has 4 degrees in MIT and a PhD. He achieved the American dream and is obviously a very smart dude. Also, he invented email. I'm not going to say he should have won. It takes time to build a name. But should he have received more than 3% of the vote? And are we paying attention? Now, to the remaining 23 listeners I have, we're going to quickly dig into the history of campaign finance laws. Or skip forward 4 minutes. I don't care. It's a free country. In 1907, we had the Tillman Act. It was the first finance law passed preventing money from corporations. The reason for this was Teddy Roosevelt had charges brought up against him. It was believed he was taking money from corporations. So to save face, he asked Congress to put together a finance law. This made it okay for people to donate whatever they wanted, but no corporate contributions. That lasted until 1971. The Federal Campaign Act of 71 replaced all existing finance laws and required the campaigns to file disclosure reports of contributions and spendings. That part is still in effect today, which is why you have sites like opensecrets.org. That is a site where you can see what company or PAC donated to which candidate and how much they gave. Example, the Slim Fast Company donated $6 million to Hillary Clinton's campaign because she's super addicted to that shit. The Campaign Act of 71 limited spendings on corporations and individuals. At this time, there was a lot of wealthy folks getting around the old laws. It also put limits on TV and radio ads. This was cool. Unfortunately, no one was in charge to oversee it. 1 year later, Watergate began. Not often talked about with Watergate was Nixon would extort money from corporations by weaponizing the IRS and threaten the corporations with audits. So, in 74, a new amendment passed through Congress that created the Federal Election Commission, the FEC, to oversee the election contributions and spendings and to also restore faith in the government. Then, 2 years later, in 76, in the Supreme Court, we had Buckley v. Vallejo. This ruling said spending limits violated the First Amendment. It said the current laws restrict the quality of campaign speeches by individuals, groups, and candidates, thus violating the First Amendment. The case was decided 7-1. This would be the first time you would hear the phrase, money is speech. This would undo most of the Act of 71. 26 years later, in 2002, the McCain-Feingold Act would restore a large portion of the Act of 71. Then finally, Citizens United in 2008 would again undo prior finance laws. A nonprofit conservative organization called Citizens United was releasing a movie called Hillary, the Movie, which didn't put her in a favorable light during the 2008 primary. Citizens United was trying to release ads for the movie, but at the time was illegal to run those ads so close to an election because of the McCain-Feingold Act. The Supreme Court ruled that this was unconstitutional. This case would actually overturn other cases and essentially make it so corporations could run ads for or against a candidate anytime they please. This gave us another famous phrase, corporations are people. So our finance laws have suffered a death by 1,000 paper cuts. Now, two phrases we need to talk about. Corporations are people, money is speech. The first one, courts basically define corporations as groups of people. So are corporations people? No. But are groups of people people? Yeah, kinda. And honestly, even if this changed, it still won't prevent wealthy people from getting around the laws. In the phrase about money equaling speech, there's two sides of this argument. As a voter, it's very tough for me to have my voice heard. Say I see Al Gore, and he's running for president, and I contribute $100 to him, and ask him to look into lowering interest rates on small business loans. It would really help the middle class. He says, okay. Then the next person in line is, we'll say, Bank of America, and they give him $100,000. Who do you think he's going to listen to? Free speech now comes at a cost and is no longer free. That's no good. Now, say I'm running against Al Gore and he has $50 million and name recognition, and I have my life savings in my wallet, and I'm a nobody. It's going to require quite a bit of capital to make some noise and have my voice heard. Money isn't speech for the voter, but it is speech for the candidate. So you see the argument from both sides. I mean, you may not like what I had to say, but I say these things so you understand what we're up against if you want to see change. The Supreme Court is not likely to change its mind on Citizens United anytime soon, as they don't have a tendency to reverse the decisions. So we're going to try and come up with a simpler solution. So here it is for the 17 listeners still with us. Here are the bullet points. What we want to do is focus less on the Supreme Court and more on a state-level change. We're already starting to see this in the 2018 midterm election. South Dakota, New Mexico, Florida, North Dakota, Arizona, and here in Massachusetts, to some degree, made changes in finance reform. What we need to do is come up with something that is easy to understand and an easy sell. Finance reform on a headline isn't catching anyone's attention these days, so the simpler, the better. My suggestion would be to put a cap on total contributions and spendings of the candidate, and not on any particular group. This financial cap would be based on population. For example, if I were to run for president, I would only be able to receive $325 million based on the population of 325 million Americans. There's a little bit of fairness and symbolism. Or, if I'm running for senator in a state like Massachusetts, my cap would be set at $6.8 million, based on the residents of that state. Any contributions would need to be approved by the candidate. Any ads produced by outside spenders would need to be approved by the candidate. And if the ad is accepted, the cost would count against the contribution cap. For the record, the cost of the 2016 election was around $2 billion. Number two, if money is going to equal speech, then we need to push for fair speech. That's what this idea is about. Free speech is hurting. Fair speech might be the best we're going to get. Number three, to simplify for an easy sell, we would call this the fair contribution cap. And to explain what it does to the average Joe like myself, it puts a cap on candidates just like they put caps on football and basketball teams. Number four, lastly, the biggest one, is to get this approved by just one state. Then the next one. This would be the same route advocates for gay marriage went. It was legal in 37 states by the time it went to the Supreme Court. It became a challenge if the Supreme Court wanted to change a majority of each state's constitution. With that being said, we're going to stop there because we only have 3 listeners left, and that is not enough at the moment to make something this big happen. But we'll revisit this in the future. For now, let's take this to our Twitter and Facebook page and see what you guys think. Again, what I'm trying to do is present at least a good idea, and hopefully, together, we can make it great. Final note, we are in a war of ideas, but we need to pay attention, keep our focus on what's important, and stop letting big media be our weapon of mass distraction.